Welcome back, everyone. I am Cas Piancey, and I'm joined, as usual, by my partner in crime, Mr. Bennett Tomlin. How are you today?
I'm doing well. How are you, Cas?
I'm doing good. I'm completely out of touch with the goings-ons of cryptocurrency fraud or scams, or I guess just the industry in general.
You've had more important things going on the last couple weeks.
I have. I've been traveling with my wife. We were in Japan. I know it's been going around a lot, but I keep telling people they should just go there. So if you can go to Japan, just go to Japan. That's my recommendation after a long trip away. And I feel like I'm part of the rest of the world because I just haven't followed a single crypto story this whole entire time, which seems like that's a normal thing for most people. But considering that we have a podcast about this and I work for a news outlet that pretty much exclusively covers cryptocurrency, I feel like I should probably get in touch with what's going on here. And you could help me out with that, maybe.
Sure. Why not? Let's start with my least favorite news from the last several weeks. Donald Trump's newest cryptocurrency, the financial fraudster and rapist, has found an audience well suited to his interests in cryptocurrencies and has endorsed a new project called World Liberty Financial. World Liberty Financial is a fork of DOE Finance, a recently hacked wrapper around the Aave lending protocol. This protocol, World Liberty Financial that is, all it seems like it's going to do is serve as a wrapper around some of the lending and borrowing functions of Aave, with maybe a crypto collateralized stablecoin thrown in. But I'm just sharing these details, not because anyone's actually going to use these protocol, but because it's important to emphasize how pointless this protocol is, so that when we get into the rest of the griftiness around it, that will kind of make sense. So the griftiness around it. Let's start with the team.
I'm just sorry. I just want to say that I'm not super familiar with this stuff. So when I look up World Liberty Financial on Coin Market Cap, is it doing really bad, or am I looking at the wrong one?
It is doing really bad, and we'll get to just how bad in a moment. Let's start with the team. So this was founded by Chase Harrow and Zachary Folkman of Subify fame. Those who don't know, Subify was the Patreon alternative that Logan Paul used. It promised that, unlike Patreon, your account on Subify would stand the test of time. And then the business quietly failed and they never announced it or mentioned it. So that one didn't stand the test of time, but now they're cryptocurrency entrepreneurs. And they have partnered up with some of the Witkoffs, Steve Witkoff, Alex Witkoff, and Zach Witkoff, property developers and friends of the Trump family, to develop this protocol. And they are aided in their efforts by Donald Trump, the chief crypto advocate, and Donald Trump Jr., Eric Trump, and Barron Trump, who are Web3 advocates or some made-up title. And the reason I'm emphasizing that these are made-up titles is because the gold paper, this doesn't have a white paper, of course. White paper is for toileting. Gold paper is for Trump or something. I don't really get it, but there's a gold paper. And the gold paper is the titles we give these folks are illustrative. Donald Trump is not an employee, director, officer, etc., etc. All the things he can't be, he's not. Because Donald Trump is doing what Donald Trump does best and selling his name.
But everything I'm reading right now is saying exactly what you're expressing, where it's well, he's not really associated with it. So
he isn't, because he does get 75% of the revenue. And that feels pretty important, right? It's hard to say, I'm not associated with this thing that I get 75% of the revenue from, I'm not associated with this thing I endorsed and get 75% of the revenue from. And that's only part of it. Initially, when Coindesk reported this story, they talked about how, only a small portion of the tokens were going to be put aside for the public sale, 20-25% or something like that, with the rest held back. And then they came on this Twitter Spaces, and I'll drop the audio in this episode here somewhere.
Approximately 63% of the tokens are going to be sold to the public. There have been no pre-sales. There have been no VC early buy-ins with discounted allocation, despite any sort of speculation out there. The first time that this will sell will be when we sell it
63%.
to the public. 63% all selling to the public. 17% have been set aside for user rewards, and only 20% has been reserved for the team compensation. That includes team advisors and future hires.
And they're like, that is FUD. We are selling 63% of this token to the public. Absolutely gonna happen. You all shouldn't listen to the media who lie and say other things. A couple days later, 63 was cut to 35.
Oh.
And then 35 was cut to 25. And then without announcement, 25 was cut to 20. And so 20 billion of the 100 billion tokens have currently been allocated for the public sale. 22.5 billion have been allocated to Donald Trump's company, as well as a bunch more millions allocated to Trump's friends, the Witkoffs, and his children and all that. Out of the 20 billion allocated for the public sale, which again is less than they're giving Donald Trump himself and is less than a third of what they promised to sell to the public, less than 1 billion, less than 5% of the 20, which is again 1/3 of what they're supposed to be selling, has sold so far. They have sold 949.16 million tokens out of the 63 billion they said on the Twitter Spaces they were going to be selling, which was eventually quietly cut to 20 billion. So yes, the token is doing really badly. Trump can't sell it. It shouldn't exist. It's non-transferable. Its only stated utility is for governance, and yet they gave more to one individual than they sold to the entire public. So no, the purpose was never fucking governance, you fucking liars. And like the entire thing is just a massive fucking grift at like every single level they could pull it off on. And the embarrassing part is that members of like crypto Twitter and like crypto executives have come on as like advisors and stuff to that. It's dumb. It's dumb. No one should have ever thought this was a good idea, but a bunch of people staked their reputation on it and are going to pretend they didn't. Oh, and the website went down. The first day of the sale, the website was down most of the day.
Nice. One thing I did notice on my trip abroad was Brian Armstrong trying to throw his weight behind specific political candidates. And it made me reflect on how a lot of these executives have come out in favor of Donald Trump. And their suggestion is that he's essentially pro cryptocurrency. And I guess I'm just curious, does it make a presidential candidate more pro cryptocurrency if they're willing to get, I guess what the word,
Obvious.
the term going around right now is that they're in the trenches, right? So if Donald Trump is willing to get in the trenches and scam and be a grifter, is that what it takes to be like? I feel like that's the wrong message to send about the entire industry.
Well, no, I think that fundamentally seems to be what the vast majority of the cryptocurrency industry cares about. Because, like, and this came up for me as a bit of frustration when there were certain people calling for, like, Kamala Harris to pivot on crypto. And I kept reading their appeals and reading, like, her stated policies and things like that. And I can't figure out what they want. At least I couldn't initially. And then I kept reading and looking at the people saying it. And I think what these executives want is a Jay Clayton SEC, basically. Basically non-action on any except the most egregious XRP level projects with like everything else ignored, no enforcement actions, no investigations, no anything. They want carte blanche. And so they're thinking the guy who's willing to run a bad A-feeder protocol as well as like a non-transferable NFT and the guy whose wife, her team was wash trading her NFT, they look at that and like, this guy's not coming after us. No Wells notices are going out in this guy's presidency. And so the reason they're supporting Trump is not because they think Trump is a good faith actor in the cryptocurrency industry. I think minus the idiots who are like directly associated with this project and their lack of judgment, I think many of the people endorsing Trump know this is a bad project, know most of the things he is doing are like counterproductive in terms of participating in the ecosystem, but they believe he will create the legal and regulatory environment that will give them carte blanche for whatever abuses they feel are most appropriate. Plus, he'll fire Gary.
I guess I'm not certain. I don't know. I guess I'm not fully aware of what Kamala's cryptocurrency policy is. I know that
it's the default you've come to expect. We need to protect innovation. We need to ensure consumer safety. We need a strong framework that ensures everyone and all their interests are equally protected.
Okay.
It's a nothing, right? We'll fund the SEC and we'll keep ignoring it for several years.
I see. Okay, but like it's not a concern. But I do think that so there's been a push by Armstrong and several others. There's what is it? Stand with Crypto or something?
Stand with Crypto.
Stand with Crypto. So is that a PAC or PAC or whatever?
I think it's a super PAC. It might be a carry committee. I have to go back and double check for sure.
But they're raising money to lobby, right? I mean, that's essentially what they do.
They're raising money to buy ads and give to candidates.
Lobby, right? That's lobbying pretty much.
Lobbying
right?
is on like behalf of specific pieces of legislation or policy. You go to the already elected people. Campaign contributions are to people who are not yet elected.
And like you said, the goal isn't necessarily even to get legislation passed. It's to do nothing instead, which is like very, very funny, right?
Or if you do want legislation passed, you want something that's going to punt it to the CFTC, and then you keep the CFTC's budget where it's at so they can't reasonably like actually regulate or run interference on a lot of things, right? Like that was the big thing like during Sam Bankman-Fried's term and came back up in like FIT 21, right? Is you punt crypto to the CFTC, you keep the CFTC funding flat or down, and then they're impotent.
So I think this is something that you and I have previously expressed in our other episodes, namely fuck the SEC, all my friends hate the SEC, in which I would say that's a pretty strong message that we send in our title, whereas the reality is it's mostly us saying that the SEC is caught between a rock and a hard place with a lot of this going on, and they've already become paralyzed in a lot of ways. And I think I've heard someone on Twitter suggest the idea that the CFTC and SEC should just be like merged, and that there should be one government agency embodying both of those. And it's something I'd never really considered before, but I don't.
That idea's come up before. I feel like there was a push for that post-Great Financial Crisis as part of like the reckoning that the regulatory agencies had to face. And I think mostly what it's come down to historically is passing a new piece of legislation that like brings in all the disparate parts of the Exchange Acts and Securities Acts and like repeals them and reframes them into a single agency with the right amount of budget and thing is a hard thing to do, bipartisan. Jumping ahead, I'm not particularly opposed to there being like a single financial regulator. Like I think the FCA in the UK has a much broader mandate than like any of the SEC, the FTC, or the CFTC in the United States.
Not necessarily a great example, though. It's not
I'm
like
not saying they're effective with that mandate. I'm just saying their mandate is broad.
Sure. Sorry, yeah, I didn't mean to get us off track there, but it's just something I'm thinking about with all of this stuff going on, where these guys are pretending that crypto is such a major issue for a bunch of the American public that it'll affect swing states and all of this other. They're spinning this narrative. I think that narrative is already false. But it also is turning things like SEC appointments or CFTC appointments into political messages. And when the candidate is actually grifting, like this is a grift, right? And also none of this money is going directly to the campaign, if I understand correctly. Like it's going directly to Donald Trump. So it's just enriching him. I find it really strange that a lot of people in crypto think that that's a good message for what the industry stands for.
Yeah.
I guess it feels like there's zero reflection, you know?
There seem to be a bunch of individuals in cryptocurrency who have signaled that they will gladly vote for a racist rapist as long as they're also a crypto scammer.
Yeah. I guess that, yeah. It's so crazy. I know that maybe we even have talked about this before, but I think Blockworks put out, I think it was Jane Zuckerman.
Oh, yeah. The reaction to her piece was just wild. I had written several things, and I think I avoided a lot of the ire she got because I'm not a woman, and so the sexist didn't feel as compelled to come after me.
Yeah, if I recall correctly, she mostly just said cryptocurrency shouldn't be the main.
Yeah.
Like you should be thinking about all the issues, and there might be issues that are more important to you. And like, I think it's fair to say that no president is going to simply like be able to kill cryptocurrency. That's like saying they could kill gold when it's
well, and crypto's supposed to be unkillable, right? We joke around about this sometimes, but the entire pitch, the whole reason this thing is supposed to exist, is because it's supposed to be impossible for the government to kill it. And so like the thing they're preserving is not the existence of cryptocurrencies. It's the profitable cryptocurrency industry they are employed by, right?
Right, yes. All points I just wanted, I think it's worth like discussing if we are bringing up a presidential candidate, doing a straight up grift. I know that seems to be the largest, most silly, stupid thing that has occurred while I've been away, but has there been other stuff?
There's others.
Yeah.
So Justin Sun is now one of the custodians for WBTC. I think you might have remembered a little bit of this, but yeah, WBTC announced that they were starting a new joint venture with Justin Sun and with BIT Global. BIT Global is a Hong Kong custodian, which is run by our friend Jennifer Zhang of, Poloniex, HTX Europe, TrueUSD, BitTorrent fame. So the director is, of course, one of Justin Sun's longtime colleagues. All 5 of the new shareholders were open on the exact same day, and one of them, of course, is a reference to Ayn Rand.
Right.
Just real classic Justin Sun stuff. But because of that, let's see. MakerDAO initially said they were going to limit new borrows against WBTC, but then ended up reversing on that. Coinbase launched their own competitor, CBTC. Kraken announced their own competitor, KBTC, I think. Justin Sun got really mad at these other competitors and is like, what? Coinbase hasn't even done a proof of reserves. This is proof that they've got a bunch of issues. And obviously the exchange he owns, Poloniex, also hasn't done a proof of reserves and also has a much larger Bitcoin on Tron product than WBTC. So Justin Sun's still a hypocrite, which I'm sure you're shocked to hear as you come back.
I'm disappointed, to be honest.
Billions of dollars of Bitcoin, partially custodied by Justin Sun. I think that's a good idea.
Me too. Yeah. I also I'm glad that there's even further, I guess having... even creating the concept of Bitcoin on Ethereum or Bitcoin on Solana or Bitcoin on whatever, on Tron, right? That's a fragmentation of Bitcoin, essentially.
And some of these folks don't remember, even with how recently Sam Bankman-Fried stole from Bitcoin on Solana. They've already forgotten that. I saw 0 people mention that during the Justin Sun thing. There is no recollection in crypto people's memories.
Right, yeah. Well, so that I guess is, I'm just thinking about how that's these are all fragmentations of Bitcoin with now added security issues, right? Every time you introduce something like this, you're adding an extra layer of security problems that are possible.
It's more of those layers of trust we were talking about in our last episode.
Exactly. But then now
now
when
one
you
of
have
those layers is Justin fucking Sun.
So you've added that as a major security loophole, I'll call it. I don't know. But then also you're fragmenting the industry further because, like you said, you're getting Kraken.
3 new competitors.
Yeah, exactly. 3 new competitors, all with their own trust issues that they're now introducing to these
all
protocols.
Competing for the same liquidity.
Exactly. And it's kind of wild to just be like, wow, how fragmented can this... I know we're doing meme coins and we're doing it just feels like it's getting more and more fragmented. And I think there's this... It goes along with the understanding of their concept of what fiat currency is and stands for and means. So they have this belief that there's infinity fiat currency, which is okay, it's true to a degree for sure. But that isn't the way liquidity works in a giant marketplace. And so when you start dragging a bunch of this liquidity out into these incredibly illiquid markets and you keep dragging it out further and further, when those things go down in price and the liquidity dries up, that money's gone. It doesn't just instantly get replaced by new money. You know what I mean? So I just feel like the fragmentation is actually a major issue of drying up liquidity that can't come back.
Yeah. And I should also add, Mike Belshey, the CEO and founder of BitCo, legitimately believed people would not be upset at the new role of Justin Sun. And after they realized people were upset, they went back on the plan to give him 2 of the 3 keys. And now, like, 1 key's at BitGo America, 1 is at BitGo Singapore, and 1 is at BIT Global. Which means Justin Sun probably didn't get what he wanted out of the deal. But yeah, just a real mess.
Okay, well that doesn't surprise me.
In other news, do you remember Northern Data? Of course you remember Northern Data, Tether's favorite Bitcoin miner. So Northern Data, the Bitcoin miner, has announced that they're considering no longer mining Bitcoins. They're going full AI.
I knew that I was about to be like, so AI then.
Because that's where they're making their money from. Their revenue from mining, both in absolute terms and in relative terms, have been consistently falling the last several quarters. And then speaking of Tether mining, there was another joint venture, 2040 Energy, which was done between Swan and Tether to do Bitcoin mining. It seems to have largely been operated and managed by Swan, but was entirely funded by Tether. And there's a lawsuit now from Swan that basically tried to sue former Swan executives and consultants because they decided to leave this joint venture, start a new company, and in so doing, like, take the role from Swan out from underneath them. So Swan was helping operate this with Swan executives. Swan started to have problems in doing layoffs. These Swan executives get nervous. They start planning their exit. They reach out apparently to Tether to get Tether to provide them cover. And then they leave. They all announce their resignation at the same time. Because they all resign at the same time, Swan ends up in breach of their agreement with 2040 Energy, the joint venture between them and Tether. And in so doing, Tether is able to effectively replace Swan with the new firm set up with the former Swan executives and consultants and cut Swan out of this mining deal. Right? So that's what's been going on there. Swan is trying to say that the valuable thing that was stolen from them was their dashboard that tracks their mining rigs and maybe some of their miner optimizations. And if you want my frank opinion of that, no, those aren't valuable. Whatever dashboard Swan developed, I'm assuming took some amount of development time, and there is some amount of cost to the business in that, but it is not uniquely differentiated to represent, this is what makes Swan special. For one thing, Swan's not special.
I would think that Tether would want something like that just based on their other investments that they've made, which Protos did a pub, which is already now out of date because of new investments from Tether, which I also wanted to, it's again, one of the few things I caught wind of. They could use the IP from Swan for some of their other investments, I would think.
But
bootstrapping little business, money transmitting businesses or money services businesses in a bunch of, I guess I'll just say, I don't know, in countries that don't necessarily have easy access to US dollars.
Yeah, but the specific IP of this dashboard that helps manage your miners and tells you what the weather is at your data centers is not a valuable thing that Tether needs to steal. So that's Tether and mining. Other things that have happened. Do Kwon's extradition got delayed.
So this is an ongoing thing that I feel like we haven't really talked much about Do Kwon since he went away.
We did a couple times, the first time his extradition got delayed or something.
Yeah, it's now happened about 15 times or something. It does feel a bit. I think there's this, I don't know what to call it other than this concept in the world where the Balkans as a region, due to its long history and recent ethnic strife and wars, is kind of perceived as this huge corrupt area. And I don't know, seeing this stuff happen in Montenegro over and over and over and over and over again definitely feels almost purposeful in it. I know that's not what's happening, Occam's razor. This is the epitome of bad governance, and there's no conspiracy needed. But wow, just the incompetence and the crazy back and forth is
But there might be a conspiracy. So you say there's no conspiracy needed, but there were those meetings and those payments and like there's not nothing in terms of conspiracy there.
Sure, no. In terms of like the involvement of the government, of the current, prime minister
of
and
corruption.
Stuff, yeah, that's for sure. But I think like at this point, the idea that like the Supreme Court and I don't even know how it's working, like lower courts and all this stuff are fighting about which country to extradite him to and how much that matters ultimately. I'm not sure. I know it's a political issue in Montenegro, but like, is it going to be a huge difference of where he first gets extradited? I don't know. I guess maybe.
It might matter to him. I'm not familiar enough with the particularities of the South Korean legal system to give besides I know what they do to their former presidents, but like I don't have like a well-developed opinion on what would happen to Do Kwon if he gets extradited there first versus the United States, you know?
The idea that opponents of the current prime minister have suggested is that he would prefer South Korea because then the investigations won't implicate him. I don't know how true that is. Like, is South Korea just going to not look further into it? I have no idea why that would be the running narrative, but maybe that's true. I don't really understand why, but it's possible, I guess. So yeah, that's not surprising. I did want to bring up that Tether did a large investment in Adecoagro. I think I'm saying that right. I don't know. Or Adeco Agro.
That was the South American one, right?
Yeah. They did this investment in early September, but I feel like it got no real coverage. They own nearly 10% of this kind of an enormous Latin American ag company. They purchased $100 million in stock, I guess. I haven't looked into the deal exactly and how they structured it. It just seems like a really weird choice for $100 million investment for Tether. I'm not sure why they're investing in a Latin American agricultural company.
Why not?
It has nothing to do with their current business model, does it?
I think part of the problem might be that Tether's current business model doesn't require much. They have so much money and so many assets that sure, they could just keep dumping them into U.S. treasuries, but the more they keep dumping into U.S. treasuries, the more Howard Lutnick could fuck them over, right? And so, putting some money in other places, doing other things, why not? They're still getting plenty. They're getting billions and billions in profits.
I do think part of this is that their suggestion, I think, is that all of this money is coming from their extra money. Like, this is not their reserves, ultimately, right? And I guess I'm looking at it and I'm like, okay, maybe it's because Adeco Agro is also getting involved in ethanol and energy production.
Could be that they think the land might be valuable for solar generation or wind generation or something like that.
And
that they probably are. It could be partially a land or real estate kind of play.
Yeah.
I think trying to read too far into some of Tether's investments would make us lose the little remaining sanity we have on the Tether topic.
Yeah, there was. You and I were also talking about the Satellogic investment that they made.
Yeah.
Which is just very odd also.
I think that's because Paulo thinks rockets are cool.
I also think it's because, they have their platform. I don't remember what it's called. What is it called? Punchhole, which is not.
Yeah, I think they went a satellite in space, a more advanced version of the Blockstream one, basically.
Yeah, which for anyone who is unfamiliar with what he's referring to, it was when Samson Mao was involved.
Still is. They rent space on 2 or 3 different satellites still to this day for that.
No, for sure. I'm just saying the concept was evolved when Samson Mao was on board as the CSO at Blockstream. And they decided the way to really make it immutable is to have a satellite that can connect to your Bitcoin node or whatever.
Yeah.
And like you said, I guess they're still doing it, and
3 satellites.
That's fine. I don't know how much that really.
Wait, 2 of these satellites have the same name. I bet they're the same satellite, just using different radios. So 2 satellites.
So anyway, I guess the idea is like, I'm not sure how much more immutable that makes Bitcoin, but okay, whatever. I guess it was a marketing gimmick. I don't know.
I think you might be onto something that Tether has imagined in their head, a similar marketing gimmick with Heat and Hole Punch.
Yes, exactly. But yeah, sorry. What is there anything else?
Oh, yes. Speaking of brands and what brands should be doing, Worldcoin is now World.
Oh yeah, Worldcoin. Really loving.
They're still at only like half of 1% of their stated eyeball goal for like 2022, but they're World now. Plus, their new orb has AI performance for reasons.
Someone I know and like on cryptocurrency Twitter said that they had invested in that token because they felt like there was no other way for publicly facing retail investors to try to get a slice of what Sam Altman is working on.
Wouldn't Microsoft be the cleaner play on that?
That's what I was thinking too.
Well, or Microsoft or Nvidia is going to be your cleaner play on that than Worldcoin, right?
Oh my God, Microsoft has been really killing it, hasn't it?
Yeah, and their deal terms with OpenAI are really good. Like Microsoft's got the really good end of the deal where they can disproportionately benefit over OpenAI, and so they might actually serve as kind of a levered bet with cap downside on OpenAI. So anyone who's saying Worldcoin is the best bet on Sam Altman, I've got questions about their analysis.
I'm looking at the coin, and it spiked and went up to almost $12, and now it's worth $2. So
it's a big fall.
Pretty big fall. And I again think that they were saying proof of humanity, yes, or something like that. And I hate it. I hate the orb. I hate everything about Worldcoin. I think Sam Altman is duplicitous, I think would be the word that I would use.
At minimum.
Yeah.
Speaking of rebrandings, MakerDAO rebranded as Sky so that they could launch a new yield thing, as well as change the unit for their governance token. But then people didn't really like the brand, so now they might bring Maker back, and it might be like the Sky Money front end powered by MakerDAO or something like that. So they spent millions of dollars rebranding from MakerDAO, like one of the oldest and most serious like DeFi brands, to Sky, and then people were like, why'd we do this?
I've been enjoying the numerous rebranding failures that we've been witnessing throughout tech in general.
I got to speak past you to the audience for a second. Anyone involved with MakerDAO who is watching this video, get Rune as far away from the project as you can. MakerDAO has the potential to be one of like a really important thing, but Rune can't help fiddling with it. He looks at it and he's like, I got to touch it. I got to take the MakerDAO money and put it in climate change. I got to take the MakerDAO money and make it no longer $1. I got to take the brand and make it Sky. Take him far away from this project. I know he was helpful in the beginning. I know that it would have been hard to do it without him, but you guys, you got to get him out of there. Okay, that's all. You can go back to your point about rebranding efforts now.
I'm just enjoying the failures. We've got Facebook becoming Meta, which everyone calls it. Facebook. Even before that, when Google was
You've got Twitter, which rebranded to something.
Well, I still think that's an incredible... What a beautiful way to even burn your money further, where like he had already burned himself really badly with that investment. And people will say it's not about the investment. Okay, sure, whatever. But like...
We've said crypto Twitter like 5 times in this conversation, and I wasn't even like intentionally trying to like spite X or something like that. It's just Twitter.
Well, yeah, and no one says like, and then I posted. It's like, no, you tweeted. Like why destroy the only valuable part of the company? Like that is the one thing of value that if you didn't touch it, it could still remain the same pretty much. That part of it. And he was like, no, we're destroying that and getting rid of the bird. And you're just like, oh, whatever.
Maybe that'll be good for the final valuation when the banks take over, because that trademark will have some less of the albatrosses hung from around its neck.
Yeah, maybe.
Speaking of failures, let's talk about FTX and Alameda Research for just a minute. Carolyn Ellison got sentenced to prison. Ryan Salami got sent to prison after a just wonderful interview. He kept trying to argue that his dog bites should keep him from prison, but the prosecutors and the judge were like, we saw you on Tucker Carlson, sir. Go to the Bureau of Prisons, today. So that happened to Ryan Salami. And Nishad Singh still hopes to avoid prison. Gary Wang's sentencing is coming up. But more and more of the FTX executives are going to jail. And unfortunately, some of the people involved seem unlikely to be indicted. Looking at you, Joseph and Barbara.
I think the one that I keep, maybe you too, that I keep reflecting on is Trabuco.
Oh,
Tabasco.
yeah.
You know, I know some people have forgotten him as an integral part of this story. I guess the running idea is that he must have gone to authorities as soon as he left or something, right? I think that's what everyone thinks happened here.
Well, I think he did the classic 1-2 punch that we've talked about, like with Arthur Hayes. He was smart enough to get outside the borders, get outside the places where they can just come and grab you, and then contact the most expensive lawyer you can find, and then have that lawyer contact the authorities. And I think Sam did those steps in the right order.
Yeah, to be clear, Sam Trabuco, we're not talking about SBF. He did everything wrong.
Yeah, Sam Trabuco. He followed the Arthur Hayes example.
Even better, though, really, because if he got a deal a sweetheart deal where it's like, yeah, well, you came to us first, you get to keep all your shit.
For as long as you keep cooperating.
Yeah, that's a pretty awesome deal that he took. And I think that is the running assumption.
Especially in light of the fact that, like, Carolyn Ellison also cooperated pretty extensively and is still getting 2 years, right?
Right. Glad to see Ryan, Salame? I don't know how you say his
It's funnier to say salami, but I don't think it's actually salami.
Yeah, I'm glad that he's gone. That's good to see.
And his girlfriend, Michelle Bond.
And I know that he's saying that he is going back. He wants to go back on his plea because they're going after his, I guess, girlfriend, Michelle Bond. Also, the mother of his daughter.
He was induced to plea by effectively being told that they would not pursue Michelle for crimes involving, that they would not pursue Michelle for his crimes or things like that. The documents submitted by the various prosecutors and lawyers and stuff make me think that that's not exactly what was said. Make me think that there may have been some intimations about investigations that might go pause or things like that. But based on the contemporaneous notes from, like, the prosecutors and stuff, it does not seem to me that what they actually said was there will be no investigation or indictment of Michelle after you plea. I think it's also unlikely that Ryan actually goes through with trying to pull out of his guilty plea, because that would, like, void his sentencing, and he already did get, like, some points reduction on things like that.
My favorite part of all of this has been, so he did that Tucker Carlson interview, and I think my favorite part was when he said, like, well, you know, I'm a wealthy white male who the jurors would hate me. And I was just completely flabbergasted, just like, oh, is that how you think of this?
Famous historical juror bias
you have
against rich straight white men.
You have every advantage ever, and you're trying to spin it.
This country can get a fair trial except for rich straight white men.
Just the idea of, like, a bunch of minorities having to resort to using state defenders or whatever, who are just instantly saying, like, just plea.
Like desperate folks who can barely, like, speak the language, relying on public defenders for crimes they don't even, like, fully understand. And Ryan's like, I'm the real victim.
It's crazy.
Here.
It's just so crazy.
I withdrew $10 million in the days before the exchange collapsed, but I needed it to pay my expensive lawyers.
Insane. Totally insane.
It was, like, literally part of the Tucker Carlson interview. And I'm watching it and I'm like, also, bankruptcy fraud was one of the charges prosecutors considered but did not file against him. So being like, sure, I withdrew money, but it was to pay my lawyers, is not a thing you should be saying in an interview, you fucking idiot.
Yeah, it was just incredible how, of course, Tucker Carlson isn't going to push back on those statements. No. But it was,
especially not anymore. Maybe a little bit he might have when he was early in his TV career, but now that
Crossfire.
He's podcasting out of his garage, like
he's always been a fucking idiot as far as I'm concerned. But whatever. Anyway, yeah. Anything else outside of the FTX gang going to jail?
The EOS founder, Daniel Larimer, created an anti-Semitic biblical apocalypse theory that stated that the last great day of the world was on October 9th. So the world ended. We were all there for it.
I remember.
Crypto people gave that guy $5 billion at one point. That's really my takeaway there.
Brendan Bloomer, he's not involved with EOS anymore, right?
I think he might have been involved with some of the community efforts to like fork it away or take it over or something.
I remember now. So I was talking to someone about how he was involved with
No, he is
Bullish.
still at Block One.
He's involved in Bullish. I think he founded Bullish.
It was spun out from Block One with a bunch of the funds they raised after they sold their Ether.
And then one of the main investors in Bullish is Founders Fund. Peter Thiel's Founders Fund. And someone was like, why would I was like, oh, that means Peter Thiel does investments like that because he gets to wield a bunch of power. When he makes those investments, he gets a huge say in what the company.
Especially in a case like that, because Bullish didn't need the money, right? When they were spun out with billions.
Yeah, you say that they don't need the money, but I think why else would Peter Thiel be investing?
They wanted him on the cap table.
They wanted
him strategically.
Yeah, but I also think there's this myth that Bloomer and Bullish still have a bunch of money. They do. I mean, how much?
You could check the SEC filings from like when Bullish was spun out. They were spun out with like $9 billion in their company accounts.
$9 billion.
Yeah,
Okay.
like almost all the funds from like Block One, they got them in Ether. They held the Ether until like near the peak, dumped them for like billions more than they'd actually raised in Ether, and then spun a bunch of those billions out into Bullish. Like initially had a plan to like SPAC or pipe it. That ended up falling through, and they ended up raising a fund with like Founders Fund and a bunch of that to like price in.
And Bloomer has lost it. So didn't he lose nearly $100 million on his Silvergate He tried to save Silvergate, and he spent nearly $100 million on that.
That's not a name I like. I forgot Christian Angermeyer is involved in the fucking Bullish spin-out.
Yeah.
I knew that because he works with Peter Thiel and on that, but I had forgotten.
I guess I'm
a
just
Tether advisor for people who don't know.
I'm just bringing it up because those guys from EOS, I guess it doesn't surprise. Daniel Larimer has long been a religious, I don't know what I'm gonna try. I'm trying not to use that kind of terminology, but he is I guess extremist in his perspectives on a lot of things is how I would put it.
Sure. I would call him an anti-Semitic nut job.
Yeah, anti-Semitic for sure, and I guess that automatically makes you crazy, I guess is the term I'll say, something like that. But then, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of religion involved in this industry for some reason. But yeah, that doesn't surprise me. But
didn't end.
But also, yeah, the world didn't end, and clearly
Spoilers.
that is it just doesn't surprise me that much that he's going there. And I also am just reflecting on these other EOS founders and like people involved with it who continue to do kind of morally questionable bullshit.
In other news, Britannia Bank, one of the banks that Tether has historically banked with, bought all or almost all of the bank and bank-like operations of Deltec Bank and Trust. Did not buy the actual bank, just bought like the lines of business. So Deltec Bank still exists, but is now mostly empty, I guess. And Britannia Bank has all the business that Deltec Bank used to be doing. And those are both Tether banks, and that's strange.
What do you think Jean Chalopin got from that? He had to get something, right? Did he just clean his hands of a dirty business, or what? Like, why?
I think that the legal and regulatory pressures from a combination of FTX, Tether, and Alameda Research over the last several years made operating Deltec vastly more complicated than they wanted. And they also saw an opportunity to take some of the executives who have been spending their time on that very regulator and law enforcement intensive part of the business and perhaps reallocate them to things like Del Chain or some of their like investment funds or things like that, things that are a lot neater in a sense, right? You don't end up having one of your executives texting with Sam Bankman-Fried like, ha ha ha, just sent over $2 billion, ha ha ha, LOL. Most banks wouldn't interrupt their movie night to send you $2 billion, LOL. So like, they don't want any more texts like that to come out, you know? That's just a theory, we don't know, but like, my guess is the pressure mounted and they decided exit was easier.
Okay, interesting. I'm not surprised by any of this, but it all seems in line with what normally happens. I guess nothing too crazy outside of Donald Trump and his nutty behavior, which again isn't something that surprises me too much. So
I do have one last update.
okay.
TrueUSD, one of my favorite stablecoins. I don't know where to put it on the list, but it's up there. They had to settle charges with the SEC over, sending a whole bunch of their backing to First Digital and like misrepresenting what that fund was invested in. So they sent all this money over. They said it was backed like dollar for dollar, but it turns out that First Digital fund they were invested in was very risky. Investing in trade finance, structured trade, export finance, import finance, supply chain financing, and project financing of entities. And memorandums for this fund they were invested in specifically listed it as speculative and told investors that they needed to be prepared to bear the risk of losing most or all of their investments. And this is noteworthy, one, because, as we've said, Justin Sun almost definitely owns TrueUSD, or a Justin Sun-owned entity owns TrueUSD, if you feel like that's a meaningful distinction. And yeah, they were doing a bunch of shady stuff with the reserves. Oh, and now First Digital has their own stablecoin because, of course, they fucking do.
Yeah. I wonder how that's doing. What is it? First Digital's
It grew quickly when Binance was eliminating TrueUSD, but its growth has slowed. And it does claim to only be invested in like safer things. It does not seem to have been invested in this same fund that TrueUSD was invested in.
2.6 billion.
It grew
tiny,
pretty quick when it was the zero fee maker taker on Binance.
but not growing anymore. Seems like it's
no, because it's no longer that. Or they might have re-added it. They changed that every few weeks, but a couple months ago it was removed.
I see. Okay. Interesting. Cool. Well, I guess that gets me sort of updated.
All the news that's fit for us to talk about for an hour.